Good afternoon, everyone. Konnichiwa. Thank you for joining us during our today's JASH Author Spotlight Talk Story with clinical psychologist and writer Dr. Scott Haas. We'll be discussing Dr. Haas's recent book, Why Be Happy? The Japanese Way of Acceptance and the term ukeireru. Before we get started, I'd like to turn the program over to President Reina Kaneko to say a few words. Reina?
Thank you, Lila, and aloha, everyone. JASH is thrilled to be able to bring to you today what will be an amazing hour with Scott Haas. We hope your takeaway will be giving yourself the gift of self-reflection after a very turbulent and difficult year, and to be able to see that your approach and attitude makes all the difference in shaping the world. So thanks so much for joining us. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lila.
Thank you, Reina. So my name is Lila Frisbee, and I am the Director of Membership and Programs here at the Japan America Society of Hawaii, and I'll be moderating today's program. So today we are using the Zoom webinar format, so all of you are muted, but please feel free to type your questions. I know you have many for Dr. Haas, but feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box. We are so honored and grateful to have Dr. Haas as our special guest today to talk story about his book, Why Be Happy? The Japanese Way of Acceptance, which, by the way, may be purchased at Barnes & Noble as well as online at Amazon.com. I personally found the book to be very timely for the current world that we live in, and a reminder to myself about embracing different perspectives. Scott Haas is a writer and clinical psychologist, the winner of a James Beard Award for his on-air broadcast on public radio. He holds a PhD from the University of Detroit, and he did his doctoral internship at Massachusetts Mental Health Center, a Harvard Medical School teaching hospital. To learn more about Dr. Haas and his recent book, check out our link in the chat box for a review that appeared in Forbes. Dr. Haas is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts and Braunwald, Switzerland, and Dr. Haas spends time in Japan each year. And I know all of you will be happy to know that he has also spent lots of time in Hawaii on extended stays, visiting with family. So one day you might be seeing him walking around someday when we can get out there. So anyway, aloha and welcome, Dr. Haas.
Aloha to you, and thank you. The honor is actually all mine because as you can see, I am not Japanese. So when I'm invited by a society such as yours, a Japan Society, it feels sincerely very comforting. It's nice to know that a book from an outsider to the community has some value to you.
Thank you. So, as you know, the Japan America Society of Hawaii's mission is to build people-to-people and country-to-country relations through our unique perspective of Hawaii, through our educational programs as well as other programming, which leads me to my first question. You've certainly spent a lot of time in Japan, know a lot of people there. Why did you first start going to Japan and learning about the Japanese culture?
So I'm going to give you the very short version. So there's two parts. The first part is how did I get interested in Japan? And the second part is how did I get to Japan? So the first part, I was 13 years old. I was living in a city in New Jersey, just 12 miles southwest of Newark. It's called Plainfield, New Jersey. We had what were, in retrospect, they were called race riots. There were riots in our city, very turbulent time. Everybody was, you weren't allowed out of your house much, and we were teenagers, so there wasn't a lot to do. The Channel 13 in New York, which was the predecessor of public television, had a series of movies every Saturday night. So the only non-European director was Kurosawa, and they showed Rashomon. And I thought, wow, for a 13-year-old in my little pea brain, the exciting part was everyone had a different perspective about what had taken place. The woodcutter had a point of view. The woman who had been killed had a point of view. It was her ghost. The investigator had a different, and everyone's point of view was valid, which I had never heard of such a thing, because in Western narratives, there's a right and there's a wrong. And this was all different narratives. I mean, there was clearly a wrong in this, but the perspectives were presented as if they were right. They were given equal validity by the narrator. So I was really intrigued on a personal level, because it made me, as a 13-year-old, think, wow, my parents aren't right all the time. Maybe I have a point of view that's valid, and so on. That was not really the point of Kurosawa's movie, but that's what I got from it. So down the street during the day, there was a bookshop. So I looked for titles by Japanese writers that were novels under a couple hundred pages, because that's about as much as I could concentrate. So I found Kawabata's Snow Country. I found a book by Tanizaki about nettles. I found a book by Mishima, and I started reading these books, and I thought, again, the perspectives were so different than Western literature. So that was that. My doctoral thesis was on the psychological effects of living under the nuclear threat, and my advisor was a guy called Robert Lifton, a psychiatrist at Yale, who wrote a book called Children of Hiroshima about the psychological effects of that disaster. How I got to Japan was, I was writing about food, and in 2002, when Lost in Translation came out, Park Hyatt, which was where it was filmed, invited Chef Daniel Boulou to come to Japan just to celebrate the movie opening, to do a 5-day event there about his restaurant in New York, Daniel, which is a wonderful high-end French restaurant. So Daniel, because I was writing about food, invited me to join him. And I said, well, what do I have to do? He said, nothing. You don't have to do anything. I said, so I'm your guest. I'm the guest of the hotel. Yeah, you can just come with us. So as I say, I had never been to Japan. So I got to Tokyo, and I was like, holy smokes. It was astonishing architecturally. It was astonishing from a gastronomical standpoint. It was astonishing from a cultural standpoint. Everything seemed very familiar, but everything seemed very foreign. Familiar in the sense of how people dressed, how people moved on the street. A lot of the food was Western food. It was a very Westernized feeling there, but on the other hand, it was very deceptive, because there was a lot of things I simply did not understand. I've been back to Japan now something like 29 times or so. So each time I go, I think I know. I say to myself, okay, I get it. This time I get it. And every time I go there, oh, everything you know up to now is wrong. I completely revise what I had understood up to that point. So I've been really blessed in having friends now who are close friends, Japanese friends, who I don't know if it's the experience of others, but my experience of Japan is it's a very didactic culture. My friends are more than happy to teach me how to present a business card, or how to behave in a meeting, or where to sit in a car, or when to talk, when to listen. So each time I go there, I've learned something new. For me, being in Japan, it's not necessarily a joyful experience all the time, but I'm never bored there. It's just spellbinding. So that's partly my relationship. And I work now for a few companies in Japan where I help them develop material on the web in English I don't speak Japanese, but they give me the impoverished English that they've translated. And then the idea is to make it more poetic.
Well, from reading your book, you have a lot of friends in Japan.
I've been very lucky.
So you write about the Japanese word ukeireru, or acceptance, and how there are many, many definitions, but the one that you fell in love with was used by a mother with a child to accept something gently, fun to imagine inside oneself, accepting reality. Can you elaborate on why this definition resonated with you?
So I asked 3 people who have helped me as interpreters to get a better understanding of the definition. And one of them sent me spreadsheets and really detailed dictionary descriptions, really fascinating. And another friend who, I think she was writing for Prime Minister Abe's office at one time, she also helped edit, if anyone knows it, Ted Bester's book, Tsukiji, about the famous market in Tokyo. So these individuals were really sophisticated and also knew me as friends for many years at this point, like 15 years or so. I consider them all pretty good friends. One of them in particular is a close friend. And what I love about the definition was, I don't think it's necessary to have children to understand the meaning of acceptance. But for me, having children was what really taught me a lot about what that word can mean. And that's why I latched onto it. So for example, when my son and daughter were really little, my task was to accept them for who they were, despite I don't mean namby-pamby, you're allowed to throw a tantrum. I don't mean you're allowed to have ice cream for dinner. My job is to get them to eat properly and not to throw a tantrum in a store or on a train. But at the same time, to try to get into their head and try to accept them for who they are and what is it that they want and how can I address their needs in a way how can I help socialize them and at the same time love them to death without equivocation, without judgment. And that's why I latched onto that word. And what I found applicable about the word and what I found really marvelous about it was, as my kids got older, I tried and I try still to take that mentality and apply it to my clinical work and apply it to just my day-to-day life. And so one of the things, I work in a very difficult part of Boston where the people have very serious problems, so economic problems. And I often will turn to the person and say, look, I'm going to talk to you like you're a member of my family. And I feel it. I really feel it if I'm saying it, I'm feeling it. And so that word of acceptance has helped me navigate difficult situations. And that's why I latched onto it. It's not accepting the person in their entirety. It's not excusing the behavior, but it's saying, it's the Japanese reflexive saying almost where there could be a difficult situation and a person will turn to you and say, thank you for understanding. And it doesn't mean that they agree with you, and it doesn't mean that they're going to do what you ask them to do, but it creates a space. And that space is, I understand you're upset. I understand that you don't like what I'm telling you, but thank you for understanding. And it creates it. At its best, it doesn't always work, but at its best, when it works, it really tamps down, it lowers, like President Biden said yesterday, it lowers the temperature. So you're not going face to face like that. So that's what acceptance means to me. That's why I latched onto that. Because if you're going to go head to head with a 4-year-old, you're going to lose. If you're going to fight, I have a lot of friends and patients with people in the household who are between the ages of 13 and 19. And I say to them, do not take them on head on. They have far more energy than you do. Far more energy, and they're nastier. So as adults, we know not to say something mean to another person because it might really hurt them. A 15-year-old, male or female, and they're angry at a parent, they will let it go. And they say remarkably mean things. So the acceptance part is accepting them for where they are and trying to negotiate the situation. And again, not doing what the 15-year-old wants, but saying, we're going to have to make this work. How are we going to make this work? I don't like the way you're speaking to me. It's not going to work if you speak to me that way. It's not, but don't play it back. Don't speak to them back that way. That's the accepting part. They're not accepting you, but you're accepting them.
I'll have to remember that when I speak to my teenage children.
Tell me about it. But it's when it works, it really works. But the challenge with them is the 15-year-old is a spy. They know everything about you. They know exactly what to say to make, not you, but the 15-year-old knows exactly what to say to get a parent insanely upset. And they'll say it. Whereas you know what to say to her or to him, but you won't say it because you wouldn't do that because you're the parent and you accept them for, they're out of control. So what seems to work with the acceptance model is I keep reminding myself, and this works from a clinical standpoint in the hospitals I've worked in when people are really out of control. It's more painful to the person who's out of control than the person who's subjected to it, even though it doesn't seem that way. But those rare moments when I've been out of control, I feel so horrible afterwards, horrible. Like, how could I have behaved that way? How could I have said what I did? So the person who's out of control benefits from your acceptance of them. You're creating like a cocoon around them. And we all fail at it. I don't know, maybe you don't, but I do. But it's really hard, but it's a great thing to aspire to.
I'm still working at it.
Yeah, well, we all are, you know.
Well, this is a good segue into our next question. One of my favorite chapters, actually, in the book, you talk about the term sumimasen. You hear it. People use it all the time here in Hawaii. I remember when I went to Japan, I heard it as soon as, like you said, as soon as you get off the plane, you hear it. So why is this word so prevalent and powerful? And how does it connect to ukeireru?
So it's literally the first word I learned. I was in Japan maybe 24 hours, and I'm not very good at visual tasks. Really, I'm not at all. I'm not allowed to fix things in my household, but I'm pretty good at language-based tasks. I can pick up languages decently. So on a day-to-day basis, when I'm with my friends in Japan, contextually, I will understand about 30% depending on the situation. So I have an ear for repetition. So I kept hearing this word everywhere. Sumimasen, everywhere. So I went over to somebody at the hotel I was staying at, and I said, what does that mean? And the person said, well, you know, it's hard to explain. It really depends on the situation. It really, really depends. So you'd hear a guy on the phone saying, you know, sumimasen. You'd hear it in a restaurant when they call over for the check, sumimasen. And there was what it seemed to me was, again, creating a certain amount of space. And it was, to me, the more I thought about it, it was a way of saying, I apologize for making my needs more important than what you were doing. I apologize for taking you away from something. I apologize for asserting my individuality. Maybe I'm disrupting the group. Maybe I'm disrupting the momentum. You're trying to bring that dish over to another table. Maybe you don't want to be bothered by me right now. Maybe you're thinking about what you have to go back to the kitchen for. But I've also heard it used as almost like a thank you. So I don't use it literally in the States. I don't say sumimasen to people in the States, but to be sure, I am apologizing all the time. And it's incredible in the States to use it because it's really disarming. So there'll be a problem with Comcast, the internet provider here in Massachusetts. And I'll call up customer service and I'll say, hi, listen, I really apologize for calling you today. I'm having a problem with my internet. The person will say, it's okay. And I'll say, no, I'm really sorry. I know that you're busy. And they're like, you putting me on or something? It's like, no, I'm really not. I'm not putting you on. But it creates, they're so used to people calling up angrily. They're so used to people wanting to fight and argue. And I did it at the supermarket about 6 months, or not 6 months ago, last year before the pandemic. This person cut in front of me. I'm standing there at the conveyor belt with my things on the conveyor belt. And she jumped in front of me and she put her things in front of me. And I looked at her, I said, what? And she said, I'm really in a big hurry. And I said, oh, I apologize. I'm sorry. You're more important than I am. She turned around and she looked at me, she said, oh, no. I'm sorry. You go ahead. I said, no, you go ahead. I really meant what I said. You look like you're in a hurry. I'm actually not in a hurry. I was just kind of surprised that you jumped in front of me. So what do you do we started talking. And by about 60, 90 seconds later, we weren't friends, but it was a friendly conversation. And it was fascinating because you could reframe it. It doesn't always work that way. But I find that when someone is angry in a public setting who I don't know, it's really great to use it because it's, as I say, it's really disarming. It's fascinating because as we know in the States, people are not usually apologizing for their behavior. And it's not always sincere when I've observed it in Japan. I mean, there's a certain kind of irony attached to it occasionally. but it works. The level of overt anger expressed is I don't see it as much there as I do here. So yeah, I use it a lot. I find it very powerful. I use it also clinically. So if I've kept a patient waiting, the person's sitting there and the receptionist will say to me, "You're about to see that person over there?" I'll say, "Yeah." They'll say, "Oh boy." I'll say, "What?" "They're really angry. They're really angry. You kept them waiting 15 minutes. So back in the day, I would just say, "I'm sorry I kept you waiting. Come on in." I go over to the person now and I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I really apologize. Is there anything I can do? I was running late. I'm not blaming anyone. It's my fault." And again, immediately the person will say, usually, "Oh, that's okay. That's all right." But it's remarkable. People just want to understand. Apology is a way of showing respect to the other person's time.
Well, I think we can all practice sumimasen, especially in our world now. Yeah.
It's nice because it does alleviate the tension. It really, we're all, you mentioned earlier about the timeliness of the situation in terms of what I've written and what many other people are writing about the situation. We're all, I don't know everybody, but we're all pretty tense. I feel a little less tense in the last 24 hours, but we're still a little bit tense. But I find that if there's strategies we can use to make each other feel a little bit better, things like apologizing, things like showing respect toward one another, that really helps a lot. And it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be that you accept the other person's point of view as better than yours necessarily, but accepting their, showing, like what President Biden said yesterday, just showing respect to one another, having respect for one another as having a different point of view.
I know, not there's a right way and a wrong way, but kind of trying to look at both sides, right?
That's right. And as it turns out, you know, if you think about it, really, it's not that complicated. And it's one of the reasons why being in Japan is so spellbinding for me and for many others, even if you're Japanese but didn't grow up there. We have far more in common than not in common. There's many different cultural traditions in Japan compared to here. But one of the reasons why I felt comfortable immediately there was, we're all, the behaviors were we're all human beings. You know, so that helped a lot.
So I think everyone kind of always thinks about what can help them in this world that we live in. So if you were to curate your own personal toolkit of values and perspectives to improve your mental well-being, to better navigate your relationships, you know, to be more understanding and in intercultural situations, what would be included in your toolkit?
So I'm going to give you the really short answer, because that's like one of the things about self-help. I'm not a self-help writer and I'm not a self-help thinker. So because one of the among the challenges with that, I'm not saying that's what you asked me, but what I'm saying, one of the challenges with people who want to make changes in their life is that they look to change the behaviors, but it's really a question of a reorientation of changing a way of life. You have to change your way of life. So that's why I think things like showing respect for people who are different than you are, who have different points of view, or accepting a person who's out of control. Those kinds of things suggest cultural values. So for me, I started this book about 4 years ago, and I had no idea, obviously, that this was going to come out during the pandemic. And on a very personal level, the ideas that I have derived from Japan were extremely important to me emotionally during this time, and they still are. And there's two things that I think about every day, and I have to remind myself. So this is my toolkit. There's many tools in it, but here are the two that I rely upon every single day. So the first one is, this is temporary. This is absolutely temporary. So no matter what is happening, it's just not going to last. If you're having a day where you wake up and you go like, you've got to be kidding. It's now 10 months of this, and there's people I care about who are sick or I'm concerned about, or employment issues, or my family in California or whatever. Today's that I'm not going to worry in the same way tomorrow as I do today. Things are constantly changing. So again, I remind myself of that every day because I forget every day. Because every day I wake up and I think, you've got to be kidding. It's January 20th. This is still happening. But you know what I learned about being in Japan was this respect for seasonality, this respect for change is constantly happening. And among the many things that Japan has brought to me is this idea of observation. And observation means that you're seeing things change constantly. So among the things Japan celebrates are things like the famous cherry blossom season, but they also celebrate things like fireflies in the summer, or there's the so-called 24 mini seasons in Japan. So there's a season in January, late January, I forget the name of it, but it's when the insects that have been hibernating wake up. And because of the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of telemedicine. Not all the offices are closed. And I have a dog, and I walk my dog 4 to 6 times a day. So we're observing. I said to my wife the other day, holy smokes, green shoots are coming up in the backyard. It's January 19th. And, she said, well, they're going to die from the frost. I said, no, the frost is going to protect them. So the idea of temporality has been very, very important to me. And the second toolkit is related to that, but it's more specific. So people say, I'm afraid of change, or when is change going to come? Well, you just changed. You changed by the end of that sentence. Change is incremental. Change is constantly happening. It's happening every second. And so one of the things I learned from Japan, and I don't think of Japan as a religious place, and I'm not a spiritual person, but there's a great deal of spirituality in Japan, specifically Shintoism and Zen Buddhism. And from what I've been able to read of those traditions or those spiritualities is that unlike the States, in Japan, the idea is, what does nature expect of us? And how can we fit into those expectations? So during this pandemic, I've been thinking, rather than be miserable and scared, which I am sometimes, like everybody else, I think to myself, now that this is happening, I don't think it's happening for a reason. I don't think it's good, but this is nature. This is nature. This is not artificial. This is a virus. This is part of nature. So what can I do to adapt to that? What can I do to meet the expectations that nature has imposed on me? So one of the poems, the poem that introduces this book is a Japanese poem that a friend of mine translated, and it's a great poem. Do you mind if I tell you read it, or?
No, please.
It's really cool. It's a 12th century poem, and it's in my toolkit. And it says, I may live on until I long for this time, as I remember now unhappy times in the past with fondness. So I thought about that a long time because I kept trying to understand what it meant. And what I think it means is that one day we'll look back on what we have gone through this year and we'll say, wow, we're still here. I will look back on those times with fondness. I do not want to be the person who 5 years from now, 10 years from now, my children, my grandchildren, whomever, say, well, what did you do during the pandemic? I don't want to be the person who says, I was scared and sad all the time. I stayed in bed. I wore my pajamas. I couldn't get anything done. I don't want to be that person. I want to be the person who says, I helped people who were more vulnerable than I was. I showed resiliency. I was scared and I was sad, but I worked hard. I ran more often. I read more books. I tried really hard. And in relationship to that, in terms of things changing and things that being temporary, if we look back, many of us, it's fair to say these are conversations I've had with my friends in Japan, because I've been doing these Zoom meetings once a week throughout the pandemic with people I work with there. If you think about what our parents and grandparents' generation went through, what we're going through right now is pretty simple and easy compared to what they went through. Pretty simple and easy. So if we can't show the courage that they showed when we know what they went through, then who are we? You know, so that inspires me too, that their courage, their resiliency is also in my toolkit, you know.
That's great. Yep, things are always changing, that's for sure. And we just got to try every day to embrace that, right?
It's happening whether we like it or not.
Right, right.
But again, I think when I think about, you know, again, one of the first things that occurred to me during the first 2 months, when I had no idea, like everyone else, when was this going to end? Was I going to die? I mean, I didn't know. I had no idea. But then I reflected back on my grandparents' generation. I thought, oh, much worse for them. much, much worse. Because I had food delivered. I have a house to live in. Nobody's knocking on my door saying, come with us. So, you know, we're doing much better. And I'm not being, many people don't know who Pollyanna was, but she thought everything was good all the time. I speak to people under the age of 30. They have no idea who Pollyanna was. I'm not being Pollyannish. What I'm saying is there's many things in our lives that give us the power to get through this. And when you think about the generations that went before us, they didn't have food delivered from Amazon, you know? So we're more fortunate in that respect.
Right, right. Funny that you talk about generations. So I'm a third generation Japanese American, but I sometimes feel a great pressure to continue our traditions, or may feel the obligation to do so. And, you know, you talk about, they were the greatest generation, right? But sometimes there's a pressure to, you know, not to be like them, but, you know, to keep the traditions. And so what I think I read something, you spoke about this, or it might have been through a conversation we had, but what are your thoughts on this, about keeping or feeling that pressure to keep the traditions?
So that's an interesting question. You mean like pressure from the older generation on the younger generation? So the older generation is disappointed in the younger generation because they're not.
Or it could be in my head that they're disappointed, but
no,
you know.
No, I'm sure you're right. You know, well, you know, so I heard a bunch of years ago, there's a English novelist, a person called Martin Amis. And so he gave this talk with another writer, Saul Bellow, and they were talking about their parents' generation, the good things and the bad things. And it turns out that Martin Amis's father, Kingsley Amis, who was a really great novelist, but was also a real racist and a real anti-Semite and a xenophobe and a really horrible person on a day-to-day basis, but a great writer, a really great writer. So what Martin Amis said at this talk was, each generation tries to be better than the one before. Martin Amis said, look, he said, I'm less racist than my father was, and I hope my kids will be less racist than I am. But at the same time, he valued his father's remarkable skills as a writer and loved his father to death. So, you know, each generation has whether you see it as an obligation or not, I mean, you know, the older I get, the more I think, you know, whether I like it or not, there's many things about my father that are in me, whether I like it or not. But so I'm trying to identify what's in me from him. So the good things are like, well, I try to bring them forward. And the things that I don't like, I try to say, well, have some awareness of it and try not to act on it. Like say being impatient or being angry or whatever characteristics he had that I don't like, but I'm sort of stuck with, but I have to try to have some self-awareness. So from a cultural standpoint, whether the grandchildren of the generation before ours values what their grandparents are trying to tell them, they're stuck with those values anyway. Some of them are pragmatic. They don't have to be just like that. But what they can do is say to themselves, what about my grandparents' generation can I use? Can I make valuable? So when you think about the resilience of that generation, when you think about what that generation of our grandparents had to deal with from the standpoint of race and gender, just two topics where they had to deal with those issues far more profoundly than our generation does. And we're not done yet, but our generation is better off than theirs, to be sure, on those in those areas. So how did they get through that? You know, how did they manage? I mean, when President Obama talked about at his talk at the DNA, when he it was the Democratic National DNC, and he said, how did the civil rights movement even, manage to get things done? They had no authority, they had no power, they had nobody was backing them up, but somehow their resiliencies gave them the courage to push forward. So for the grandchildren who make fun of the things about the grandparent generation that are corny or like not fitting in with the American dream or whatever, try to recognize the cultural values that made them strong. So that's there. You don't have to like everything about them, but to be certain they're in, whether the grandchildren acknowledge it or not, they're stuck with it. They're stuck with that DNA. So you might as well identify the things about that generation that are exceptional. I mean, I don't think it's the greatest generation, but there were things about that generation that are stunning. I find fascinating. And I don't mean courage in the face of adversity. I just mean, like, how did they manage to get through the day knowing that there was discrimination? I don't understand how they managed to do it. I don't know where they managed to hold on to their sense of self-respect and self-regard. Where did that come from? And I think it came from cultural values independent of the mainstream culture. So that independent culture said, doesn't matter what people think. We know that we are valuable.
Yeah, I know. I think about how brave my ancestors were to come to Hawaii, not knowing what to expect.
Right.
So much courage that they had. So, well, I see in the chat box that we have a fan. It says, Aloha Scott, Lloyd Nakano here from Ka'u, Wood Valley, Pahala, Punalu'u, and Na'alehu. You look well.
Lloyd.
I know we spoke about you spending a lot of time in Hawaii, so I guess you made some friends here, huh?
I know Lloyd from Tokyo.
Oh.
He's actually a famous guy, Lloyd. Lloyd was the GM for Seiyo Ginza, and he is extremely well known in the hospitality business in Japan, and everyone who knows him loves him. He has an extremely positive vibe. So does he have a question?
Well, he says here, is mindfulness part of the vocabulary of happiness?
Well, yeah, I think that mindfulness is the boiled down version. I think that when you think about as again, I'm not a spiritual person, but from what I've been able to read about Zen and what I've been able to read about Shintoism and so on, mindfulness is fundamental to those practices, those ways of life. So, for example, when I showed my book to my friend Takeshi, who lives in Niigata, I said, "What do you make of this book? I'd like you to take a look at this and tell me, am I off base or not?" Which, again, I've been very blessed over the years, because when I was writing this book, I gave it to my Japanese friends to read before I gave it to my editor to say, where did I get it wrong and what do I need to work on? So Takeshi read the book and he said, "Scott," I said, "What?" He goes, This is a book. This is Zen. You wrote a book about Zen." I said, "I did not." He said, "No, you did." So I didn't mean to do that. But I think mindfulness is a situation where you're not making it about yourself. You're trying to take a few steps back. So you're trying. It's basically the mindfulness part of it is. And I see this all the time in Japan, and I have applied this here to the States all the time. almost every day. And the idea is this: if the situation is stressful, it does not mean that you have to respond to it in a stressful way. That's the mindfulness. And it happens to me every day in the States, and not every day, but often in the States, there's stressful situations. And it came home to me in Japan. One example was I was with my son. We were in Ishikawa Prefecture. We were on a train. Snow was coming down. The train stopped. That was it. We were not going any further till they guys could get on the tracks and sweep the snow off the tracks. And it got really quiet on the train, like really quiet, you know. And I was thinking how in the States on an Amtrak, it would get quiet, but then people start getting on their phones and like texting and tweeting and complaining to Amtrak and get this, I'm late for my meeting and all this stuff. And people be on their cell phones and complaining. And on the train, it got really quiet. And then people started laughing and telling jokes and opening up soft drinks and beer. And the idea was the situation was scary, but we didn't have to react to it in that way. And that was the mindfulness part.
Okay, we have another question from Patrick. You mentioned Snow Country earlier. Is the end of the novel where Shimamura looks at the Milky Way and it comes roaring into him related to the idea of ukeireru?
I don't know. It's been it's been years since, I mean, like I read that novel when I was a teenager. It sounds like that's what Patrick thinks. And if Patrick thinks that, chances are, I don't know Patrick, but it sounds like that's what happened. It sounds like the person at the end accepted their position in the universe. It sounds like from that description, there was a way in which they felt at home among the stars, and that there's a certain liberation in recognizing or accepting your own insignificance. And that's, again, something from Japan, that the idea of accepting the situation and realizing you're not that important, that whatever you're doing, it just doesn't matter that much. I mean, it matters, but it doesn't matter in the way you think it matters. You know, eventually, you know, we're not going to be here anymore, any of us. So whatever's bothering you right now, it's just not going to bother you a few years from now, and eventually it's not going to bother you at all. So why not adopt some of that mentality? And perhaps that's what's going on with the stars. I'm not sure.
So another question. What is the difference between ukeireru and shoganai?
So that question has come up a lot in conversation and in meetings like we're having now. And I think it's important to differentiate between acceptance and resignation. So my first exposure to the idea of resignation in Japanese culture came from reading John Hershey's book on Hiroshima, where the individuals who were victimized in that attack were saying to doctors, it can't be helped. I'm resigned to this, shogunai. That's not the same as acceptance, because it's saying we're done. It's fatalistic. And it's in a situation like that, it's very powerful and extremely poignant. And, you know, if one were to be more emotional, it's to the point of, you know, you could be moved to tears by that level of resignation. It's the kind of thing you might say to a person in hospice care. You know, am I going to get better? No, you're not. You know, we're going to resign ourselves to this. We're going to talk about whatever it is we're going to talk about, but we're going to talk about it within the context of letting go of that spark of life. And we're going to value one another. I'm going to tell you how much you've meant to me, all the things that you might say to an individual that's it. Because it's misleading to say to the person, accept the possibility of getting better. That's not quite fair in a lot of ways, because maybe resignation to a situation that's not going to improve is of some benefit to the person's sense of well-being. Maybe that gives that person some feeling of letting go, just letting go just letting go. Whereas acceptance of the situation is, we're stuck on this train in Ishikawa Prefecture. We're not going to be here for the rest of our lives. Let's hope that it's only 3 hours rather than 48 hours, which can happen in Nagano, to be sure. There were drivers stuck on the highway for 48 hours there. Let's hope that they get these train tracks clear. But while we're waiting, we're going to accept the situation. We're not going to drive everyone around us crazy with our anxiety and our sadness about missing our meeting or about being stuck here. We're going to accept the situation and we're going to make the most of it. What does nature expect of us? You know, so I mean, I think that it's fair to say that resignation might be like a corollary of acceptance, but it suggests that we're done. It suggests there's no wiggle room. Whereas I think acceptance on an interpersonal level can be, there's challenges in the marriage. I accept the situation that my spouse gets home at 10 o'clock at night and he or she is exhausted and they have no time to hear about my day. I accept that situation, but I accept it in the way that Michelle Obama talks about acceptance in her book, where she says, you accept the situation while acknowledging that it's an effort to change it. So you're not resigned to it. You're not saying, oh, my husband never gets home, my wife never gets home till 10 o'clock. Oh, well, that's the kind of marriage I'm in. The acceptance part is saying to the spouse, when they're calm and everyone's relaxed, not at 10:15 that night, but that weekend after he or she's gone golfing, let's say, they come in and you say, you know, I got to talk to you about something. It's really upsetting me. It's not anyone's fault. I know you have to work late, but is there some way we can get around this? What can we do? What can we do to make this better? Well, that's accepting the situation in order to create change. Now, if the person then says to you, that's who I am, too bad, I don't want to hear about it, well, then you've got a problem. But most people, if you say to them, at least in my experience, what can we do to make this situation better? Because when this problem continues, I'm not the spouse you want me to be, and you're not the spouse I want. We've always gotten along. I mean, if it's a problematic marriage that's been going on for years every day, good luck. But if it's not that, if it's a specific situation, you can accept it in an effort to change it. And as I say, that's what Michelle Obama talks about in her book, Becoming.
Group versus individualism. When I hear this, I think Japanese culture versus American culture. Team versus it's all about me. What can we learn from these opposing ways of thought?
Well, I think it's like going back to moving away from the actual marriage to the metaphorical marriage. So the metaphorical marriage is, you can marry the two cultures. So it's not like one is better than the other, but both have an enormous amount to learn from one another and both can benefit. A good marriage, both, heaven forbid your spouse is just like you. It's much better if you have differences. It can come down to your spouse likes mayonnaise and you hate it. But the point is that you have to have differences in order to make it functional. So I think that when there's meetings that I have in the States, I have, again, learned a lot from Japan about this. And the idea is consensus building. What do you think? What do you think? How can we as a group come to some resolution that may not fit everybody perfectly, but everyone leaves the room feeling okay about what we've arrived at? So the idea of self-driven conflict resolution in the States has enormous drawbacks because everyone can be out for themselves. And again, I don't mean to be black and white, because there's plenty of group consensus in the States, particularly through church involvement or community groups. The African-American church has been fundamental in creating a group consensus. The civil rights movement has been great about, I mean, Rosa Parks refused to get up not for herself, but for the community. You know, she wasn't speaking for herself. So the States is not unilateral, and there's certainly plenty of individualism in Japan. People say Japan is a conformist society. Well, it's certainly conformist compared to the States, but there's enormous, if you look at the architecture of Tokyo, there's extraordinary individualism. Same thing with Japanese fashion, a lot of individualism, or Japanese fiction. There's many, many stories that emerge from writers that are very different from one another. So I think the cultures have a lot to learn from each other. In the States, I find that taking the idea of a group way of looking at things is helpful to me, and it's helpful when I am working with groups in a work setting or even with my family. The reverse is also true. I've had friends in Japan who say to me, they really don't like their job. They just can't stand it. So my friend Yuko doesn't like her job as a writer, let's say, but she's afraid to quit her job because she might not succeed as a writer. So I kind of encourage her to take a chance and to see what will happen. And if she fails at it, at least it's not really a failure. It's an honest lack of success that she can always go back and work as a writer for another company, let's say. So I think that what comes up a lot in conversation with my Japanese friends in Japan is they will ask me questions related to asserting themselves outside of the group. And there's some benefit, it would appear, having a Westerner encourage them to cultivate that individualism. And in contrast, in the States, there's some benefit to the individuals when I speak to them and say, it's not about you. This has nothing to do with you. I'm sorry that you don't like to wear a mask in a store. I'm really sorry about that. But when you don't wear a mask in the store, you put me at risk. So that's fine. If you get sick, that's your decision, but you're going to come to my hospital. My wife is a doctor. My wife's a family physician. You're going to get her sick. So if it only affected you, I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. But if you're making our communities unsafe or my wife sick, you need to think about other people. You really do. Or on a train, on a Japanese train, you will rarely hear somebody talk on a cell phone. Blue moon. Whereas in the States, it's constantly happening, even in the quiet car on Amtrak. And you feel like saying to the person, you have to leave the car. You're destroying my time. It's not about your important phone call. I can hear this is an important phone call, but we don't all have to participate in it. So things like just thinking about others. I mean, the Japanese self-awareness is so much based on the people around you. I landed at Narita Airport during a snowstorm 8 years ago, and we were stuck overnight after a 14-hour flight. We were stuck there for 23 hours. You could hear a pin drop. There was no food to eat. The Army brought out blankets and bottles of water. That's what they brought out. And people were really quiet. Nobody flipped out. Nobody got mad. I mean, they may have felt mad. They may have been, scared. But the last thing they wanted to do, recognizing the cultural framework, was to disrupt the so-called harmony of the group. Because if I went crazy and started screaming at the military guy, handing me a bottle of water and a blanket saying, that's what you've got for me, that's it, everyone around me is like, I'm trying to nap here. I'm trying to deal with this. You're pretty selfish to think that way. And that's pretty cool.
Something that you said previously, I was talking to a friend about this talk, and we're talking about group versus, individualism. And she says, yeah, that's tough, because what if you don't fit in the group? Then what?
Oh, that's right.
So,
Well, that goes back to change. So I don't want to get into it too much, but how's this? So I have friends in Japan who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, 70s, and 80s. I have friends in all those groups. And the people in their 30s have different views than my friends in their 60s and 70s. And the views are different. It goes back to Martin Amis. I have friends in their 30s who have loved ones from other cultures that are not Japanese. Their grandparents and parents, no disrespect, would not feel that comfortable in that situations like that. My friends in their 30s, many of whom are women, are looking to have positions of authority. I consider that a welcome change. So in other words, what I'm trying to say by saying this is Japan is a really extremely successful way of establishing groups. So all I'm saying is expand the definition of what the group is. So if you have a child who has a learning need, that child should not necessarily be excluded from the group. Make the learning need part of what the group values. It doesn't have to be, nothing is static, nothing stays the same. So what was a group, what was considered part of the group in Japan in the 1950s, now here we are in 2020s, in 70 years, the definition of what is acceptable to the group has changed. It's more generous now. The groups are bigger now. You see more women in positions of power and economic and social authority in Japan than you did in the 1950s. So it's always changing. And I'm a very positive person. I think it's changing for the better. I think that the more the group expands its definition of what is allowed to fit in and what isn't, the better everyone is in the group. I mean, you never know, and it goes back to acceptance, which is that you never know. You can say to yourself, I would never want to be working with someone who is X, Y, or Z. Well, what happens if your son or daughter ends up being X, Y, or Z? Well, you may have thought that that's only happens to other people. It happened to you. Your daughter or son is X, Y, or Z. You're going to throw them out of the family because you don't like people who are X, Y, or Z? Well, no, you're going to love them because you may not accept it at first, but if you want to have a relationship with them, because they're the same person, except for that X, Y, or Z, you're going to accept that person. So why not take that mentality as part of a group and say, oh, this is weird, this person's weird, but they like noodles the way I like noodles. They like beer the way I like beer. They're nice, they're respectful. So we're going to make this work. So the group, the idea of who's in the group, that's going to keep changing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights about ukeireru, your book. Again, I really enjoyed reading it. And in today's world, we can really use some of these tools that you provided. What was it? Everything changes. Everything changes, right?
I think I've changed after this hour.
I know I've changed it after this pandemic. I used to have a fear of technology, but here we are, right?
Exactly. No, it's good. And it doesn't go away once you have it.
Yeah, so I believe if we begin by accepting and being kind at least to each other, that's a good place to start. So thank you so much for sharing everything. We really enjoyed today's talk. And as we mentioned earlier, if you'd like to read Why Be Happy, The Japanese Way to Acceptance, we highly recommend it, and you can find it at Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. So again, thank you to Dr. Scott Haas for providing this wonderful opportunity for our guests. If you enjoyed this program, please consider becoming a member of JASH or making a donation so we may continue to bring you quality programming. Please visit our website at www.jashhawaii.org to learn more about our organization and to view some of our past virtual programs and events. So coming up next week, Wednesday, and you can join us too, on January 27th, please join us for our JASH virtual New Year's reception. This is just a nice get together where we ring in the new year. It's going to be kind of late for you though. Sorry, it's at midnight, right? It's at 6 o'clock Hawaii Standard Time. So midnight. You'll be in bed. All right. Yeah, but we'll be able to enjoy entertainment, messages from our special guests, and education from our Asake sommelier, Keith Nakaga.
Oh, wow,
So,
cool.
yeah, it'll be a fun event. So it'll start at 6 and you can go to our website to sign up for it. I think this brings our program to a conclusion.
Thank you
We
so
really
much.
enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Your questions were wonderful, and I was really honored to be part of this. Thanks again.
Okay, so we'll be in touch.
I hope so. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care. Aloha.